Hello friends, welcome back with another video. Today we are going to talk about the unified India. What happened if India is not divided? Before the partition of India in 1947, the country's territory was much larger than it is today. The British colonial government had established control over a vast swath of land on the Indian subcontinent, which included what is now India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and parts of Nepal and Myanmar. This territory was governed as a single entity known as British India, which was divided into several provinces and princely states. The provinces were directly administered by the British, while the princely states were ruled by local monarchs who were subject to British authority. The area of British India varied over time due to changes in territorial boundaries and political developments. At its greatest extent, it included present-day India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and parts of Myanmar and Nepal. However, parts of the territory were ceded to neighboring countries at various times, such as Burma, now Myanmar, and Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, in the early 20th century. The population of British India was diverse, consisting of numerous ethnic, linguistic, and religious groups. The country was home to Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, Buddhists, and others, each with their own customs, traditions, and beliefs. The partition of India in 1947, which created the separate nations of India and Pakistan, was marked by widespread violence and displacement, as millions of people were forced to migrate across newly drawn borders based on religious identity. Today, the territory of India consists of the Indian subcontinent, excluding Pakistan and Bangladesh. The country is home to a diverse population of over 1.3 billion people, making it the world's second most populous country. The British first established a presence in India in the early 1600s, when the East India Company was granted a charter by Queen Elizabeth I to trade with the countries of the East Indies, including India. The company established its first factory in the port city of Surat in Gujarat in 1613, and gradually expanded its trading activities across India, establishing additional factories and trading posts in cities such as Madras, Calcutta, and Bombay. Over time, the East India Company became increasingly involved in Indian politics and governance, as it sought to expand its control over Indian territories and resources. The company established military and administrative control over parts of India, often in collaboration with local rulers and elites, and began to exercise significant influence over Indian society and culture. The British colonial presence in India was marked by a range of policies and practices, including the exploitation of Indian resources and labor, the imposition of British legal and administrative systems, and the promotion of Christianity and Western culture. British rule in India also brought about significant changes in Indian society and economy, with the introduction of new technologies, industries, and modes of transportation and communication. The British ruled India for a period of about 200 years, from the mid-18th century until Indian independence in 1947. The colonization of India by the British began in 1757 with the Battle of Plassey, which saw the British East India Company gain control over Bengal, one of the largest and wealthiest provinces of India at the time. Over the next several decades, the British East India Company expanded its control over other parts of India, establishing a vast colonial empire that was governed by British officials and military personnel. The colonization of India was marked by widespread exploitation and oppression of the Indian population, as the British imposed their culture, language, and values on Indian society and systematically extracted wealth from the country. In the mid-19th century, the British Crown took direct control of India from the East India Company, establishing the British Raj as a formal colonial government. Under the Raj, India was governed by British officials and a small number of Indian elites who were loyal to the British. Despite some efforts at reform and modernization, the British colonial government remained deeply unpopular among the Indian population, who viewed it as an oppressive and illegitimate regime. In the early 20th century, the Indian independence movement gained momentum, with leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi leading mass protests and campaigns for self-rule. Finally, in 1947, the British government agreed to grant independence to India, following years of negotiations and political upheaval. The partition of India into the separate nations of India and Pakistan was a traumatic and violent process, marked by widespread displacement, communal violence, and loss of life. Nevertheless, India's independence from British colonial rule remains a seminal moment in the country's history and a source of pride for many Indians today. It is difficult to determine an exact figure for how much wealth the British took from India during their period of colonial rule, as there is no consensus among historians on the matter. However, it is widely acknowledged that British colonialism had a significant impact on the Indian economy and that large amounts of wealth were transferred from India to Britain during this period. One of the most significant forms of exploitation was through taxation, which was used to extract wealth from India to fund British colonial rule and support the British economy. The British also imposed trade policies that favored British goods and restricted Indian industries, further stifling economic growth in India. Another form of wealth extraction was the British acquisition of Indian resources such as land, raw materials, and labor. For example, India was a major producer of textiles, and the British East India Company used its monopoly on trade with India to export Indian textiles to Europe and import British textiles to India, which further destroyed Indian industry. In addition, the British systematically looted and plundered Indian treasures, artifacts, and wealth, particularly during the period of colonization and exploitation of India by the East India Company in the 18th and 19th centuries. While it is difficult to determine an exact figure for how much wealth was taken from India during the period of British colonial rule, some estimates put the value in the trillions of dollars in today's currency. However, it is important to note that colonialism had a profound impact on India beyond just economic exploitation, including cultural destruction, political domination, and social disruption. The partition of India in 1947 was a complex and multifaceted process that was driven by a combination of political, religious, and social factors. However, at its core, the partition was the result of long-standing tensions between the Hindu and Muslim communities in India, exacerbated by the policies of British colonial rule. Throughout the colonial period, the British had pursued a divide and rule strategy, which involved exploiting differences between different communities in order to maintain their grip on power. This strategy contributed to the growth of religious and social divisions in India, particularly between the Hindu and Muslim communities. In the early 20th century, the Indian nationalist movement began to gain momentum, with leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi calling for an end to British colonial rule and the establishment of an independent India. However, tensions between Hindus and Muslims continued to simmer, with both communities competing for political power and influence. As the Indian independence movement gained steam, the British government recognized the need to negotiate a peaceful transfer of power to Indian leaders. However, they faced the challenge of managing the competing demands of different religious and ethnic groups, particularly the Hindu and Muslim communities. In 1947, the British government announced a plan to partition India into two separate nations, India and Pakistan, based on religious identity. The plan was controversial and deeply divisive, with many people on both sides of the religious divide opposing it. Nevertheless, the partition was implemented, and India and Pakistan became independent nations in August 1947. The partition was accompanied by widespread violence and displacement, as millions of people were forced to flee their homes and migrate across newly drawn borders based on religious identity. The legacy of the partition continues to shape the politics and society of India and Pakistan today. Imagine if India and Pakistan is not divided. When India and Pakistan were partitioned in 1947, it led to one of the largest mass migrations in human history. Millions of people were uprooted from their homes and forced to move across the new borders between India and Pakistan, often facing violence and persecution along the way. This migration resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people and led to significant loss of property and economic disruption. If India and Pakistan had not been divided, it is possible that this violence and displacement could have been avoided. A unified India might have been able to find ways to address the political and religious tensions that led to partition, and to create a more inclusive and equitable society that respected the rights of all citizens regardless of their religious or regional affiliations. In addition, a unified India might have been better equipped to address some of the ongoing challenges facing the region, such as poverty, inequality, and environmental degradation. A larger and more diverse country might have been able to marshal greater resources and expertise to tackle these complex problems, and to promote economic growth and social welfare across the country. However, it is also possible that a unified India might have faced its own set of challenges, such as managing competing regional and religious identities and balancing the interests of different social groups. Without partition, India might not have had the opportunity to create its own distinct identity and political culture, which has played a significant role in shaping its history and development since independence. Thanks for watching.